I think I am a good mayor, but a bad politician. It's different. Cities are a means to a way of life. And I say, look, we cannot talk about transport solutions unless we know what kind of city you want.
Hi and welcome to the newest episode of Urbcast, which is the first episode in English after a month break. We start with a blast because today my guest is Enrique Peñalosa, who is a former mayor of Bogotá in Colombia. He was the mayor of Bogotá twice, from 1998 until 2001, and then elected again for the 2016-2019 term. Today we reflect on his two terms and the significant improvements he made to the city. Enrique Peñalosa shared his achievements like bikeways, bus rapid transit, libraries, schools and parks, and even initiating the city's first subway line. However, he faced resistance from car owners and almost got impeached twice. He emphasizes that such improvements often meet opposition and argues that cities are crucial for constructing equality and a better quality of life, regardless of political ideology. Towards the end, we discuss his book, Equality in the City, which explores designing cities for equality and happiness. This episode was recorded at the Urban Future Conference in Rotterdam in June. Urbcast was the media partner of this event, and I'm very happy that I could meet so many fascinating guests and speakers as Enrique himself. Welcome to the newest episode. I just wanted to start and say, Enrique, welcome to my podcast. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting me, Marcin.
It's a big pleasure to meet you because, of course, you influenced, I think, a lot of people who are working with cities. And that's also the topic of our discussion today. But not only, I also would like to talk about some challenges you face on the way to becoming mayor, twice actually, mayor of Bogotá. To start, how do you reflect on your two terms as mayor when you look at the city right now?
I would love to do many more improvements to it. I never think it's enough. There will be many, many more things to do. But I think it's clearly much better than it was. And especially also the vision. I was mayor for the first time in 1998. It's already 25 years ago. Maybe you had not been born.
I think I was maybe like 2 or 3 years old.
And at that time in my city, there were no sidewalks. In the whole country. And the few that there had been taken over by cars. But even before we go into what I did or why is it better, I would say that cities are a means to a way of life. So what we are designing is not some kind of urban infrastructure. For example, it's often that I am invited to speak about transport. And I say, look, we cannot talk about transport solutions unless we know what kind of city you want, because it's very different if what you want is a city more like Houston than if what you want is a city more like Amsterdam. Before, let's say what kind of city you want. But even before you know what kind of city you want, what you really have to choose is how do you want to live? Because a city determines a way of life. This is why it's so important, because there are happier ways to live. This is why our cities are extremely important. This is why it's so beautiful. And this is why this discussion about cities is not for urban experts, but for human beings. And so, my city, yes, I think it's much better because, for example, we started. Of course, there were always bikeways in the Netherlands and Denmark and in a few in other Northern European countries. But when we started doing massively bikeways, there were no, we did 10 years before Paris or New York or London. And it was a weird thing then. Also, we created, and now we have in Bogotá the most people using bicycles in America, more than 1 million trips daily. Subways are wonderful, but they are extremely expensive. So created a BRT system, a mass transit system, bus-based. And this system is still only 114 kilometers, but it moves 2.4 million people daily. And it's been increased. And also I contracted the first subway line, which is under construction now. And we did some beautiful libraries. We did almost 80, it's like 70 schools, beautiful schools. And we did hundreds of parks, improvements to the informal settlements. So I think it's better. I mean, we could go on for many things, but I think clearly it's better. But again, not just the city, but the people have much clearer vision. I mean, I was almost impeached. It was a war to get, I mean, for example, when I was mayor the first time, there were only maybe 10% of homes in Bogotá had cars. But they were the most powerful people in the country. And so to have a war with them, it was very difficult. I mean, it seems to somebody in Europe to say that it was difficult to get cars off the sidewalk sounds like a joke. But I think nothing is more difficult in developing cities than that.
We will discuss about those challenges because I was reading about it, that you've been almost recalled twice during your terms as mayor because of the changes and the vision you had, and many people didn't agree with that. But also, if it comes to those changes, you said that you were actually the pioneer or one of the pioneers if it comes to BRT, the bus rapid transit, or, for example, the bike lanes. If you didn't have that many role models to look at, how did you know that that's the right thing to do?
Well, when I was young, when I was a child, really, I was already obsessed with equality. My father had been head of the Colombian Land Reform Institute, which was forcefully buying farms from large landowners to distribute to small farmers. And some of my schoolmates were owning families of those farms. So I was very conscious of these equality issues and all of this. And I was obsessed with equality and economic development for my country. And then when I went into the university, I was convinced that socialism was the solution for us when I was 15 or 16. When I went to university, I realized that was a failure. It was a failure both in terms of economic development and in terms of equality as well. So at that time, I got more and more interested in cities. My father was Secretary General of the first Habitat Conference, United Nations Habitat Conference. My city was growing at that time at 4% per year. And so I began to become more interested in cities than in economic development. Of course, it's important economic development, and I like it still, but I thought the way we did cities was crucial for happiness and for competitivity and for, if we were able to save a park, for example, land for a park, as the city expanded rapidly, this park would make people happier for hundreds or thousands of years. And if we did not save that land, it would be very difficult later to demolish 1 or 10 or 50 hectares of city to create a park. So it was a very important thing to do. So I began to be obsessed with cities. And later I did some graduate school in France. I mean, I went to France and I was working very hard, and I was very poor working, a poor student. But I only realized I was poor many years after, because actually I was extremely happy. And I also became even more conscious of how powerful a good city is to make life happy, even if you're poor. And so I was always thinking about these things and studying and reading, going to forum. I never in the university took any studies about cities, but I was obsessed in reading and looking and about urban issues, and I went to all kinds of forums. Like, for example, when I see here young students, young people, I remember many times, I went to many forums, and they were forums about studies organized by the World Bank or whatever. And I think maybe there were 50, 100, 200, 300 people, and maybe 90% of the people there were not really paying that much attention. But there was this young student there who was me. I think helped change very much my city and other cities. So maybe here, among the people you are talking to, there is a student that doesn't open his mouth or her mouth who will maybe change her city later. And always, I still kept my obsession with equality. So everything I did, bike quiz or BRT or everything, still is related to equality, because BRT is equality in action, is democracy in action. When you have that, it's even much more symbolic than a subway, because when the $200,000 cars are stuck in traffic and don't move, and the bus zooms by next to them, so this is equality. Or a protected bikeway also, I think, has to do with equality, because it shows that somebody in a $100 bicycle is equally important as somebody in a $100,000 car.
Definitely, I want to inspire young people as well, students, and not only because we never know what our path can be and where do we end up.
Exactly.
And I also think that there are many ways in which we can influence the city and change it. Politics and being on the city side, governing the city, is one of them. Why did you decide to go this path? Why did you decide to run for the mayor? You just said that it was such a challenging journey, especially with a lot of backlash, a lot of protests, and you even said war.
In cities, the cities are mostly decided by government. I mean, this is not like making a candy factory or something. This is something that has to do with society. And of course, in more advanced societies, there is much more participation. Unfortunately, sometimes those who participate the most are those who are just opposed to everything, not those who are proposing things. I think it should be a requirement for somebody to oppose something, they should also propose something. But no, there are some opposition specialists. And so I also had it clear I did not want to be an appointed government official, because there, when you are appointed and you do something controversial, you are simply fired or ordered to stop by your boss. But if you are elected, so you have support and you are, like the difference between being elected and appointed, I think is a little like the difference between being the owner of a company and an employee. So the elected person is the owner. I knew I wanted to be elected because I was not very much obsessed with power, really. I did not care so much about, and maybe this is why I have not been a very good politician, because I was really extremely concerned of what I wanted to do and not so much about how to get to power. And I really wanted to be elected to implement some things. Specifically, not just to be elected. I did not want to be mayor. I wanted to do things. To be mayor was just a tool. A tool. I did not feel any more important being a mayor than being a dishwasher in a restaurant. That gave me the possibility to do things.
You said that you were a bad politician. So I just need to ask, when you reflect on your 2 terms as mayor of Bogotá, of course, a lot of success stories, but what are the things that you would do differently or that you regret that did not happen?
I think I am a good mayor, but a bad politician. It's different. So I did many things as politicians, probably that I should have not done that. Also, in politics, there is so much calumny and slander and things, so it's amazing how people believe the lies, but maybe I did many wrong things for elections, but I think I did more than 99.9% of mayors. But still, there were many things I could not do. Maybe I should have pushed more to do things some quicker, to get them assured quicker. But more and more societies have many ways to block projects, I don't know if it's good or it's bad. I mean, it's good, I suppose, if you block bad projects, but so judges now sometimes have much more power than elected people, and judges who rule and make decisions without having any understanding really of the issues, but they have a lot of power. So it's very important to have your dreams, to have your vision, but to have studied very much. Primary examples, like in Curitiba in Brazil, even though I wrote articles in the press many years even before knowing Curitiba, which basically described the BRT system, but we improved the Curitiba system very much. But clearly it was a very big help that Curitiba existed. And clearly was a big help that the Dutch bikeways, the Danish bikeways existed. So you have to study a lot so that when you confront battles, you know you're right, or you think you are right. Yeah, you have to have arguments both to implement them and also to confront the battles. If you're not truly very convinced of the difficult battles, as soon as you confront problems, you back up. So you have to really be convinced. And in order to be really convinced, you have to be studying very much in depth the issues.
If it comes to introducing changes in cities, in Bogotá,
I'd like to explain to your listeners a little bit about Bogotá. Bogotá is a large city. It's a developing country city. For example, here we are in the Netherlands. For us to have the income per capita of the Netherlands, if we have a good economic growth rates, it would take us like 150 years. Not to catch up to the Netherlands, but to get to where the Netherlands is now. It would take us 100 years or more, unless we grow at 8% or something. But Bogotá is a large city. It has 8 million inhabitants now, plus around 1.5 million or 2 in the surrounding municipalities.
It's bigger than Denmark, where I live.
It's very big. There are much bigger ones, but this is a big city. It's very far into the interior of Colombia. Colombia is a very tropical country, but Bogotá is 2,600 meters of altitude. So it's very cool. It's a little bit like now we have here in the Netherlands. It's very much the same temperature as it is here now in the Netherlands in this time in June. And we have a lot of rain. So this is a little bit, we have a lot of poverty. But we have also a lot of green. We have beautiful mountains next to the city. So this is just to give a description of what this is about.
And when you introduced those changes in the city, I believe it was dialogue-based, but it was very top-down. There was some visions for the city that you had in terms of different aspects, the parks, the transportation, and how people use the city. How did you get the citizens on board? Because often the top-down policies are the ones that people are against.
They were I would like to say they were very democratic, but no, they were very top-down. And not even from universities or anything, because nobody was studying about cities. There were no proposals from universities or from anybody. So, it was such a lack of a clear vision that, as I say, it was incredibly difficult just to get cars off the sidewalks. Something that is so obvious in a civilized society. But if you want to know what the difference is between an advanced and a backward city, the main thing is that you will find cars on sidewalks or where there should be sidewalks. It happens very often in cities that the people who are affected, they make a huge fuss and they fight like crazy, but the ones who are benefited don't say a word. If you get 50 cars off a sidewalk, and this will benefit 50,000 people, the 50,000 people that benefit, they stay silent. But the 50 that are affected, they make a huge racket. I just published a book by the University of Pennsylvania. It's called Equality and the City, where I say that a good city constructs equality. It's very powerful, the equality that a city can construct. We can talk about this later. And also that a more egalitarian society tends to produce better cities. I believe, for example, that the Netherlands has always had, or Denmark has used much more the bicycle, even though the weather is much less pleasant than the one in Italy or Spain. It's because in Italy and Spain, society is much more unequal. That is changing, but some important Italian or Spanish businessmen, they will not go around in public transport or bicycle because they think they are too important. While here in the Netherlands or in Denmark or in Sweden, a big businessman will easily take the public transport. Equality is more fertile for a good city. But most of the obstacles you find to constructing a city, a better city, is because some powerful interests are against it. I mean, there are 2 or 3 reasons why better cities are not made. One is you don't have the vision. People have not even thought about these things that can be done. To imagine, why don't let's have a park here, Nobody had thought about it. Or why don't we organize buses in this way, A second one is because maybe there is no money. And a third one is because even though everybody knows it should be done, there are some very powerful interests that oppose change. Sometimes it's lower income interest, but most of the time is, for example, the biggest problem in developing cities in Africa that is growing now, or even in Latin America, is that private property of land. In advanced societies such as Northern Europe, nobody makes money from changing rural land to urban land. Because when you change rural land to urban land, the value increases 20 times. And so, in these advanced societies, you tax this profit away. So nobody gets richer from this unearned income. But in developing countries, and even in the United States too, people can make billions changing rural land into urban lands. The market does not work. So the increase in price in land, first, is an obstacle for the cities to grow in the right place. So many poor people are forced to go to slums in the wrong places, in areas where there are flooding areas, or to the high, steep mountains where there are landslides or things, or simply far away. People are forced to go far away, or to have cities where there are not enough public spaces for roads or for parks or for whatever. So private property is a big obstacle. I mean, private property does not work in the case of land around growing cities. For example, this is the type of thing that are important to intervene.
Well, how would you tackle, or how did you actually tackle this challenge of privatization in Bogotá? I guess some of the changes that happened, they would not be possible if the problem was not overcome.
Well, I like to say that I believe that in most cases, it's much more efficient to have private operation of different services and things. It's much more efficient than to have government-owned services which are extremely politicized, inefficient, corrupt. And even if there is corruption in the contracts with the private, you can solve them. But in the case of land, for example, it doesn't work. So in the case of land, we had projects. We created a company that would buy large extensions of rural land forcefully, if necessary, in order to, so the government would do urbanization. But then the private builders would do the building under some regulations. Or in other cases, we forced many private owners to contribute their land to a fiduciary so that the whole large chunk of land was managed as a government-designed new city where there were a lot of requirements for low-income housing and things like this to be there as well. Well, there are different ways. In some cases, for example, before we had the BRT, we had some crazy millions little buses, like it happens many times in the developing world. Thousands of almost individually owned buses that were complete chaos. Complete chaos. It was a mess. There was bad service. It was horrible. And so we created some public companies to operate the BRT, many of them with shareholders, a public company that would, again, contract with private operators. I think a privately operated bus is much better operated than a government-owned bus, but still is operated now as a subcontractor of a publicly owned company. So there is more government control now, but still the buses are operated by private companies under contract. So I think this issue of whether some things are private or public, which used to be the ideological discussion of the left or whatever in the 1950s or 60s, this is not an ideological issue. I mean, we should do whatever is most efficient, whatever you can produce at the best. Sometimes you need more government, sometimes you need less government. But the criteria is what is most efficient, what gets the better results at the lowest cost.
You said about the left, and there's also, of course, the right if it comes to ideologies and how you see the world. The position of mayor is run in terms in many countries, including Bogotá. How can you make sure that you keep some of the changes and that the city has this long-term vision for the development when sometimes the new mayor is coming and they are coming from completely different party and from completely different world, and also the political view is on the completely different side from left to right. And that was actually the case in Bogotá, right? A couple of the terms in the last 20 years, there were people from both sides of spectrum.
This is, again, what I'm trying to say, this is irrelevant. I mean, left or right is an irrelevant discussion. It's equally absurd to think that things should be private per se as to say that they should be public per se. It's just, that's why I say case by case. But for example, when I created the bikeways in 1998, I even had to create a name for the bikeways because there was not a word for that. I mean, and the one that is used normally, we use it for closed in the Sunday streets in Bogotá. But bikeways have continued to expand all the time with left or, I mean, this is almost irrelevant. Left or right, the bikeways. Today, Bogotá, as I said, still about 70% of all the bikeways in Bogotá have been made under my governments. But left or right, or the BRT, for example, the BRT has continued to be expanded by every single mayor to increase its length by 60%. A large part of it contracted by other people. So when things work, this is almost a mathematical thing, If you say, okay, I would love a subway, yes, but the thing is that it costs 15 times more, no? So I myself contracted the subway that is under construction too, but some emphases are different. For example, I think the left in Colombia, they tend to want to give more money to the poor. And by the way, I don't think the city has enough finances. It was not designed. The financial structure of Bogotá was not designed to give out money subsidies. So I think I prefer to give more schools and parks and good public transport, because this giving away money is like a never-ending pit. I mean, you can give all you want and it will never be enough. And especially because this is something that in the Colombian financial structure is more appropriate to be done at the national level. For example, I think I improved much more the lives of the low-income people than any other mayor in this city ever. For example, in the informal settlements, I legalized 5 times more informal neighborhoods than the next mayor ever. I legalized 5 times more, and I did huge improvements to the informal settlers. So to bring their sewage, water, schools, parks, roads, transport, nurseries. I think this is a better way to improve people's lives.
To wrap it all up, if it comes to making people's life better in the cities, the last segment of this conversation, I would like it to be a book recommendation, because that's something that I often always ask my guests to recommend a book. But as you've mentioned before, you have written your own book. So to summarize your whole journey so far as a mayor and what you did after, can you say something more about the equality and the city?
Yes, I would very much like to recommend Equality and the City, my book, of course. But this is not about my experience only. Of course, I give me an example, but this is, I have been a mayor. As I mentioned, I have been studying this issue for many years. And I have been doing lecturing and consulting all over the world. And so this is not a book about what I did as mayor. Maybe I will write another one about that later. But this is about what the title says, equality and the city. And I say the whole world has adopted private property and the market as the best way to manage society's resources. I mean, clearly communism failed. It was a failure. So this is why the Eastern Europe is not communist any longer. East Germany is not communist. It was a failure. I mean, China was a failure until it adopted private property and the market. So clear, everybody agrees on it, except a few nuts in the world, like the North Korean dictator or something. But most of people in the planet agree today that the best way to manage most of society's resources is private property and the market. Not to benefit the rich, but to benefit everybody. But there is a problem with that, is that it creates inequality. It needs inequality. You know, for the market to work, some companies must succeed, some others fail, some people make more money, some other people make less. So I say, one thing, cities can be very powerful means to construct equality. A different kind of equality. It's not income equality. So I say there are three kinds of equality. One is the obvious one, that in a good city, which may be obvious in Northern Europe, but is not so obvious in many places in the world, rich and poor meet in public spaces as equals. Rich as poor meet in parks, in sidewalks, in public transport, in bicycles. This is something very obvious here, but not in Houston, and much less in developing cities. And another kind of equality is equality of quality of life, so that everybody, regardless of income, and especially children, should have access to sports facilities, swimming pools, music lessons, things like this. And the third kind of equality is what I call democratic equality, which is based on the fact that if all citizens are equal, the principle of all constitutions, a democracy is not just the fact that people vote. That's just one of the requisites. Democracy is that a constitution is obeyed. And a constitution, all constitutions have a premise, and is that all citizens are equal. All citizens are equal before the law. If all citizens are equal, then public good prevails over private interest. So this is, for example, there should never be private waterfronts, riverfronts or lakefronts or ocean fronts, for example. Or, for example, if all citizens are equal, a bus with 100 passengers has a right to 100 times more road space than a car with one. Or a pedestrian has a right to the same amount of road space as somebody in a Lamborghini, or somebody in a bicycle has the right to the same amount of road space as the guy in the Rolls Royce. If public good prevails, also we should be able to turn, for example, as I did, the polo fields of the most exclusive golf club, of the golf courses of the most exclusive clubs, into public parks in cities where there are not enough parks. This is not communism. This is basic democracy. It's usually done very often to build roads or airports, but not so often to create parks or low-income housing. So this is what this book is about. And in many ways, and I say how much of the obstacles to create better cities are inequality obstacles that are caused. But I talk about, and even many progressive people who think they're very progressive, they stop being progressive. For example, when there are projects that will bring lower income people into their neighborhood. You know, for example, in New York, there is a very progressive senator, Senator Schumer from New York, who has always supported the Democrats and Barack Obama and all that. But his wife, who was the Irish Wanshall, who was transport commissioner for New York, once they were building a bikeway around their neighborhood in Park Slope, a very fancy neighborhood in Brooklyn, then she was totally radically opposed because they don't like the low-income people in bicycles going near their neighborhood, you know. So this is everywhere in the world. It's the same. These are the issues, some of the issues. I mean, I talk about the land and, of course, things that are very relevant for the expanding African cities, but also to the U.S. And so the issue of the car and the bicycle and how car has, I mean, everybody knows, doing some damage to the city. How can you do a better city in general? Why to have some boulevards or avenues is better than to have highways or these kind of issues are the ones I talk about in this book of how cities can construct a different kind of equality and a happier life.
Enrique, thank you very much for sharing all of that, especially the challenges you faced over your time as a mayor, and not only, and also the equality, the book that you've just written. Thank you for sharing that as well. I will also add the link in the description of the episode so that people can see and check and read. And yeah, thank you one more time for joining this podcast.
Thank you very much, Marcin. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the newest episode of Urbcast. If you enjoyed it, please share it with one person who might also find it interesting. If you would like to reach out to me, suggest a guest, topic, or anything else, please, you can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or website. Everything you will find in the episode description. Talk to you soon.